The words came without hesitation, casual, almost bored. "You're not my dad." Travis said it like a weather report, a small truth dropped into the air between us. I was standing in the doorway, arms weighted with grocery bags that cut into my fingers. The smell of rain clung to my jacket, wood dust still on my cuffs from the day's work. I had stopped at the market after a long shift, picked up their favorite cereal, orange soda, and a box of steaks for dinner. I thought maybe a full table might bring us a quiet evening, a little warmth. I thought wrong. He didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. His voice was flat, unaffected, like he'd been holding that line in reserve for years and finally decided it was time to cash it in. For a second I couldn't move. The house hummed with refrigerator noise, the faint creak of old wood beneath my boots. I stood there, half smiling, pretending it didn't cut straight through me. "All right," I said softly. "Dinner's in an hour." No reply. Just the soft tap of his thumbs against the screen. "My name is Andrew, 45 years old, carpenter by trade, fool by heart. I've spent most of my life building things that other people broke. Homes, tables, fences, anything that could be mended by patience and sweat. I thought families were the same way. That if something cracked, you could reinforce it with love and consistency. You could rebuild it one act of care at a time. When I met Sarah, I thought I'd finally found a reason to believe in that idea. She was warm in a quiet way, her laugh cautious, her eyes tired in the kind of way that makes you want to promise safety. She had 3 kids, Travis, Mia, and Zach, and a house that echoed with the absence of their father. Brian, the man before me, wasn't gone. He was a ghost that still called, still showed up on birthdays with 2 bright smiles and promises he never kept. He was the kind of man who could buy affection in an hour and disappear for months without consequence. When Sarah told me she wanted something stable, I believed her. Stability was my craft. I bought an old Victorian at the edge of town, leaning, tired, the kind of house everyone else passed over. His bones were good. I could see the life inside it, waiting to be restored. Every plank I sanded, every window I replaced felt like building a future for us. For them. I pictured Travis bringing friends over, Mia practicing her school play on the porch, Zach drumming in the attic. I built that house with my own hands and told myself that once it was done, we'd all be safe inside it. But safety means nothing when it isn't wanted. In the early months, I mistook politeness for progress. Travis would give me a quiet nod when I dropped him off at basketball practice. Mia would smile, once, maybe twice, when I helped her rehearse lines for a play. Zach laughed when I fixed his drum set after he broke it. Each tiny flicker of connection felt like evidence that I was slowly becoming one of them. I clung to those scraps. I remember one evening, not long after moving in, I found all 3 kids in the living room watching a movie. I sat on the edge of the couch, unsure if I was welcome, but Mia patted the cushion beside her. "You can sit," she said. I did. For the first time, I felt like maybe I'd stepped inside their circle. But then Travis said, "Dad showed us this one." And just like that, I was outside again. That was how it always was, 2 steps in, 3 steps out. Still I kept working. Because work was the only language I trusted. I drove Travis to practice, built Mia that small stage in the backyard, taught Zach how to tighten a snare. I showed up for every school event, every concert, every game. I thought maybe showing up enough times would prove I wasn't going anywhere. But Brian didn't have to show up. He just had to arrive. Every time his car pulled into the driveway, the air changed. The kids would run to the window, shouting his name like a miracle. I'd watch from the kitchen window as he stepped out, clean shoes, careless grin, holding boxes of pizza or cheap souvenirs from wherever he'd been hiding. He always knew how to make an entrance. I envied that ease, not the man but the way the world bent for him. He didn't build anything, didn't fix, didn't stay. But he was adored. Once I saw Travis wearing a new jacket, the tag still dangling. "Dad got it for me," he said proudly. It was 2 sizes too small. I offered to exchange it for the right one. He said no, he'd rather keep it like that. "It's from Dad." It's strange the way love works when it's bound by blood. It doesn't need logic. It doesn't need effort. It just is. I told myself that time would change things. That love built slowly was stronger than love inherited. Sarah believed it too, or pretended to. She'd take my hand sometimes after the kids had gone to bed and say, "They'll come around. They just need time." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe we were both building the same dream. But she still compared me to him in small ways. Brian never worried about money this much. Brian used to let Travis stay out late. Brian always said the kids needed freedom. I never argued. I just nodded, swallowed the weight, and went back to work. The house became my refuge. The smell of cedar, the sound of the sander, the small victories of fixing what could be fixed. When everything else felt ungrateful, the wood never lied to me. It resisted, but it gave way eventually, unlike people. The rejection came gradually before it came all at once. Little moments that seemed harmless at first, Travis rolling his eyes when I spoke, Mia ignoring my questions, Zach saying, "Mom says I don't have to." Each one a crack in the foundation I thought I had reinforced. And then that day, the grocery bags, the rain, the words that drew a line I'd been pretending didn't exist. "You're not my dad." I don't think he even meant to be cruel. It was just the truth spoken aloud for the first time. Afterward, I went to the kitchen, unpacked the groceries, lined everything neatly on the counter. I heard laughter from the living room, the sound of his phone buzzing. The world kept moving, unbothered. I cooked dinner anyway. Sarah came home late, kissed my cheek without looking me in the eye, and asked if I'd picked up the dry cleaning. I said yes. I didn't tell her what Travis said. Some words feel too small when you repeat them and too large to ever forget. That night, after everyone went to bed, I walked through the house in the dark. The floors creaked softly, the air smelled of rain and quiet failure. I looked at the walls I'd painted, the shelves I'd built, the door frames I'd measured to perfection. Everything was solid. Everything except the thing I wanted most, belonging. I sat at the kitchen table, the one I'd built from reclaimed oak, and thought about the strange arithmetic of family, all that you give, subtracted by all that they refuse to see. I told myself the words didn't matter, that I could keep giving without being accepted. That love was supposed to be unconditional, even when it was one-sided. But I lied to myself. Because later, lying in bed beside Sarah's steady breathing, the sentence replayed in my head, soft, certain, and merciless. "You're not my dad." And for the first time, I wondered if I was trying to build something that didn't want to exist. Still, I held on to hope. The most dangerous kind, the kind that survives even after it knows better. I told myself I'd wake up tomorrow, keep working, keep fixing, keep showing up. Because maybe someday they'd see. Maybe one day the sound of my hammer would stop being background noise. Maybe one day this house would stop feeling borrowed. And maybe, just maybe, I'd stop hearing that voice in my head reminding me of what I wasn't. Not their father. Just the man who kept the lights on. Every family has its own kind of weather. Ours was a slow drizzle, constant, quiet, and hard to notice until you realized everything was damp. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors. Just the steady erosion of respect, like rain wearing away stone. After Travis's words, I expected things to shift, maybe harden, but life carried on with its strange, polite rhythm. Breakfast still happened. Chores still got ignored. The house still breathed, pretending nothing had cracked. But I felt it, in the pauses, in the sideways glances, in the thin, exhausted air between us. Now and then I'd catch glimpses of acceptance. Little moments that glowed for a heartbeat before they faded back into gray. Mia once thanked me, for building her that stage in the backyard. It was a small thing, a few planks of cedar framed with string lights, but to her, it was a stage, a world. She stood on it one evening after sunset, reading her lines under the soft bulbs, and for a fleeting second I saw pride in her face. Not just in herself, in me. "It's perfect," she whispered. I smiled, said nothing, afraid that words might break it. Zach called me cool, once when I fixed his drum set at midnight after a leg snapped clean through. He sat beside me, yawning, his little hands brushing sawdust off the floor as I tightened the last screw. "Thanks, Andy," he said. "You always fix things." I didn't correct him for using my name instead of Dad. I took what was offered. Even Travis, in his way, had moments of softening. The day I bought him new sneakers for basketball tryouts, he smiled, barely, but it was there. "They fit," he said. That was it. No thanks, no warmth. Just a factual acknowledgement. But I took it. I stored it like a relic. Those scraps kept me going. You start rationing affection in a house that refuses to give it freely. You live off crumbs and call it love. But in the wider world, I remained invisible. At school events, the programs listed Mom and Dad, always meaning Brian. When I stood in the audience beside Sarah, other parents would smile politely, but their eyes always slid toward him when he showed up. The charming ex-husband. The weekend father. The myth that refused to die. He had perfect timing, always arriving at the exact moment when the kids needed saving from consequence. Missed homework, a bad grade, a broken curfew. Brian appeared with a grin, a story, and a slice of pizza. "Don't be too hard on them," he'd say. "They're just kids." Then he'd leave before the dishes, before the bills, before the cleanup. And somehow I became the villain. I started to notice the small ways Sarah protected him. Subtle, almost kind. She never spoke ill of him in front of the kids. She never corrected them when they bragged about him. "He's trying," she'd say softly. But trying meant texting once a month and showing up when a camera was around. When we married, I thought it would change things. That a ring, a promise, and shared vows would create boundaries, a new family line drawn clean and strong. But during the reception, I overheard Mia tell her friend, "Mom married Andrew because he pays for everything." The words landed quietly, hidden under music and laughter, but they stayed with me long after the night ended. Respect, it turned out, didn't come with commitment. It had to be granted, and no one in that house seemed willing to give it. I tried setting rules, small, reasonable things. Phones off during dinner. Dishes washed before bed. No slamming doors. But every request became an argument I was destined to lose. Travis would look me dead in the eye and say, "You can't tell me what to do." Mia would sigh, "Mom doesn't care if I do it later." Zach would shrug, muttering, "Dad wouldn't make me." And Sarah, she would sit there, silent, her face unreadable. That silence was worse than any word. It was permission disguised as neutrality. Meals I cooked were ignored. Gifts I bought were dismissed. Advice was mocked. It became clear that I wasn't just outside their circle. I was the scaffolding holding it up while everyone pretended the house stood on its own. I learned to keep quiet. It was easier that way. The less I spoke, the fewer reminders I got of what I wasn't. Still, part of me kept searching for signs of connection. Some nights, when the kids were asleep, Sarah and I would sit in the living room, soft music playing, her head on my shoulder. In those moments, I believed we were on the same side, two adults trying to build something against the tide. But even that illusion started to fade. She stopped meeting my eyes when the kids disrespected me. She'd defend them gently, always gently. "They're adjusting," she'd say. "They'll come around." I stopped believing her when I realized she said it to herself as much as to me. One night, after a particularly tense dinner, I found Travis in the kitchen rummaging through the fridge. I asked if he'd finished his homework. He didn't answer. I asked again. Still nothing. Finally, he turned, stared at me with the detached confidence of a boy who knew exactly how powerless I was. "You're not my dad," he said again, quieter this time, almost a whisper, but it carried the same finality. I didn't respond. I just walked past him, grabbed my jacket, and went outside. The air was cold, sharp. The house glowed behind me, warm but unreachable. I sat on the porch steps, listening to the rain hit the gutters. That's when I realized how much noise I'd been holding inside. The noise of trying to belong, of trying to prove worth in a place that treated it like charity. Sarah came out eventually. "What are you doing out here?" she asked. "Just getting some air." She wrapped her arms around herself. "He doesn't mean it." "Yeah," I said. "I know." But we both knew he did. As months passed, the rhythm of rejection became routine. My name rarely left their mouths unless it was attached to a request. "Andrew, can I have money? Andrew, can you fix this? Andrew, can you drive me?" The moment I said no, they'd turn to Sarah, and within minutes she'd give them what they wanted. It wasn't even manipulation anymore. It was muscle memory. I tried not to resent her for it, but resentment grows in silence. It takes root where conversations die. I kept working. Overtime, side projects, anything to keep money flowing because if nothing else at least I could provide. The kids might not respect me but they'd never go hungry. That became my creed. If they couldn't love me they'd at least live well under my roof. But that kind of logic corrodes you from the inside. You start mistaking usefulness for acceptance. You start believing that if you stop giving you'll disappear completely. At some point I realized I was afraid, not of losing them but of confirming what I already knew, that I never really had them. One Sunday morning I found Sarah on the porch, scrolling through her phone, smiling at a message I couldn't see. "Brian just sent a photo," she said when she noticed me. "He took the kids to the zoo last weekend." She showed me the screen, the three of them bright-eyed, arms around him, smiles wide. For a second I couldn't breathe. "They look happy," I said. "They do," she whispered, and in her voice I heard something dangerous, nostalgia. I went back inside, closed the door quietly, and sat at the table. That photograph stayed in my head for days, their faces glowing for a man who'd done so little and gotten so much. I kept wondering what I was doing wrong. Was it my tone? My expectations? My insistence on structure? But the truth was simpler, colder. I was the substitute teacher in a class that never stopped waiting for their real one to return. And Sarah, she was the principal who didn't want to get involved. I began to withdraw slowly. I stopped correcting them. I stopped asking. I started focusing on my work again, the only thing that ever made sense. In the workshop, surrounded by sawdust and the steady hum of tools, I felt human. Out there would listen. Nails obeyed. Mistakes could be sanded away. Inside that house, nothing could be fixed. But still I hoped. That stubborn carpenter's hope that if you keep reinforcing a structure long enough, one day it'll hold. Because no matter how cold the nights became, I still set the table for 5. It didn't happen suddenly. Breakage never does. It begins with hairline cracks. Moments you ignore because admitting them means admitting defeat. The night everything finally collapsed, the table was set for 5, the air heavy with that brittle quiet that comes before storms. Dinner was supposed to be simple. Roasted chicken, potatoes, green beans. I'd cooked it all myself the way I always did. I even lit candles, thinking maybe the gesture might turn the evening soft again, like the early days when Sarah and I still touched each other without hesitation. But the house was already divided long before we sat down. Travis was glued to his phone, earbud dangling. Mia scrolled through something, smirking at her screen. Zach tapped a rhythm on the table, the beat of indifference. Sarah said nothing. Her silence was an old language by then. I cleared my throat. Can we put the phones away just for dinner? Travis didn't look up. Why? Because this is family time, I said, keeping my voice calm. He laughed, that cruel, shallow laugh teenagers use when they want to humiliate you without effort. You're not my family. The words were sharp but not new. Still, something inside me shifted, subtle as the creak of a board under too much weight. I looked at Sarah. She kept her eyes on her plate as if studying the potatoes might save her. Sarah, I said quietly, can you back me up on this? She hesitated, then whispered, just let them eat, Andrew. It's been a long day. There it was again, that surrender disguised as peacekeeping. I felt my pulse in my throat. I'm not asking for much. Just an hour. Travis sighed dramatically and tossed his phone on the table. There. Happy? The sound of it hitting the wood echoed through the room. Mia giggled. Zach smirked. Something in me tightened. Don't disrespect me, I said. Travis leaned back in his chair, smirk curling. Disrespect? I'm just saying facts. You act like you run this place, but you're just a guy who pays for stuff. My fork slipped from my hand, clattering against the plate. Sarah flinched. Travis? He cut her off. What? It's true. That was the moment, small, quiet, almost ordinary. But I knew. I felt it in my chest, the way wood feels a nail driven too deep. That sound when the grain splits. I didn't yell. Didn't curse. I just sat there, staring at the 3 of them, her children, my investments. The house I'd built for them, the meals, the tuition, the endless hours. Everything I'd poured in suddenly looked like nothing more than spilled water on a table. I looked at Sarah one last time. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. That silence was the last nail. I stood slowly, pushed my chair back. You're right, I said. I'm not your father. Travis shrugged. Glad we agree. I'm also not your wallet anymore. That got their attention. Even Mia looked up. Sarah's voice cracked. What are you talking about? But I was already done explaining. I picked up my plate, carried it to the sink, and rinsed it under cold water. The sound of it was deafening in the stillness. Then I walked out. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the workshop, the smell of sawdust grounding me in a way no human ever had. The tools hung neatly, obedient and silent. I stared at them for a long time, thinking how strange it was that everything I built outlasted the people I built it for. Around midnight, Sarah came in, robe pulled tight around her, eyes red. You can't just walk out on them, she whispered. I didn't walk out, I said. I'm still here. I just stopped pretending this house isn't built on contempt. They're kids, Andrew. No, I said. They're mirrors. They learned from you that silence means I don't matter. She flinched like I'd struck her. That's not fair. Neither is loving people who only love you when you're convenient. She didn't answer. She just stood there trembling, then finally said, You'll regret this. I already do. She left, closing the door softly behind her. At dawn, I made coffee and sat at the table alone. The chairs around me were empty, but somehow I felt less alone than I had in years. There's a strange peace in surrender, not the noble kind, the exhausted kind. The kind where you stop fighting to be seen and just accept the invisibility. I started going through the finances that morning. Years of receipts, bills, tuition payments, family vacations, braces, camps, cell phone plans. Every number was a scar. I made a folder, labeled it proof. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I needed evidence, something to remind me that my love hadn't been imaginary. Then I opened my email and canceled the family vacation. Florida, 3 hotels, all paid in advance. Gone in one phone call. When the confirmation arrived, I felt lighter. That afternoon, I called my landlord friend who owned some units near my workshop. You still have that one bedroom available? He did. By evening, my things were packed. Not everything, just what was mine before all this. My tools, a few shirts, my father's watch, the wedding photo I couldn't bring myself to leave behind. Sarah followed me to the door. You're seriously doing this? Yes. What about the kids? They have their father, I said. They made that clear. Her eyes filled. They didn't mean it. They did, I said quietly. You did too every time you let it pass. She reached for me but I stepped back. Don't, I said. You had years to reach. For a second I thought she might scream but she didn't. She just let her hand drop and whispered, please don't hate them. I shook my head. I don't. I just can't keep financing my own rejection. When I left, the house looked almost peaceful, the way a battlefield looks after everyone's gone home. The apartment was small, sparse, quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't accuse. I set my bag down and stood in the middle of the room, breathing. For the first time in a decade, the air didn't feel borrowed. The next morning, the calls started. Sarah first, then Mia, then Zach, then finally Travis. Each message sounded like panic wearing anger's disguise. You can't just leave. You ruined everything. Mom's crying. We need you. I didn't answer any of them. By the second day, the tone shifted from fury to confusion. They wanted to know why the vacation was gone, why the accounts froze, why the car insurance was suddenly invalid. I didn't owe explanations anymore. Instead, I sent a message to Sarah. Check the folder on the table. Everything you need to understand is inside. Inside it were the receipts, every dollar, every proof of how much it cost to be unseen. That night, I drove past the old house. The windows were lit, the curtains drawn. I saw silhouettes moving inside, blurred shapes of the life I'd built for them. For a moment, I thought I saw Sarah standing near the window, phone in her hand. She didn't look out. I sat there, engine running, until the porch light flicked off. Then I drove away. The reaction came in waves. First, the anger, voicemails full of shouting, tears, and accusation. Then the bargaining, come back, we'll talk, we'll fix it. Then silence. The longest silence of my life. I didn't fill it with music or company. I let it echo. I wanted to hear what my life sounded like without them. It was quieter, yes, but it was also honest. Weeks later, I saw Sarah at the grocery store. She looked smaller somehow, thinner. Her cart was half empty. She didn't see me at first. When she did, her face shifted. Surprise, then guilt, then something like understanding. We didn't speak. Just nodded. Two people who once called themselves a family now reduced to strangers passing between aisles of bread and milk. Driving home, I realized that was the real breaking point. Not the dinner, not the words, but that moment in silence when neither of us had anything left to defend. I didn't lose a family that night. I just stopped pretending I still had one. And for the first time in years, I felt something that resembled peace. Not happiness, just the relief of no longer trying to belong where I wasn't wanted. The house, the kids, the silence, they were all still there, but I had stepped out of the picture frame. I had finally stopped building what refused to stand. I thought leaving would end the noise. That distance would silence it all, the bickering, the contempt, the small humiliations disguised as jokes. But noise has memory. It follows you in echoes. The sound of a slammed door can live in your bones long after you've walked away from the house it closed on. The first weeks in the apartment felt unreal. The air was cleaner but too quiet. No footsteps overhead, no voices bleeding through walls, no laughter that wasn't mine. I kept expecting someone to call my name. They didn't. The silence had weight, but it was honest. It didn't judge me. I filled the days with work. Carpentry was easier than people. Would never lied. Every cut had consequence, every mistake left evidence. I repaired furniture for neighbors, built cabinets for small shops, fixed fences that had rotted from neglect. It was humbling how quickly I returned to solitude. The world didn't care that a man had lost a family. It kept spinning, indifferent, steady. Sarah called, of course. At first, daily. Then every few days. Then less. Her voice shifted through stages, anger, guilt, pleading. She asked me to reconsider, said the kids were confused, that they missed me. They don't understand what you're doing, she said. I know, I replied. That's why I did it. There was silence on the other end. Then a whisper, you're punishing them. No, I said. I'm teaching them what absence costs. She didn't call again for a while. I started sleeping better, though sometimes I'd wake before dawn and sit by the window, staring at the city lights flickering against the clouds. I'd think about the old house, about how much of myself still lived there, in the walls, in the furniture, in the floors that creaked in familiar patterns. I had built that house to last. Maybe that was my mistake. I built permanence for people who treated everything as temporary. 3 weeks after I left, I heard the first whisper of their unraveling. Brian, the hero of their stories, the father of their fantasies, had been caught in a lie. His debts were public now. Sarah mentioned it in a short, bitter call. He owes back child support, she said. Thousands. I didn't respond. She waited, maybe hoping for sympathy. I guess the kids know now, she added softly. I just said, good, and hung up. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, just clarity. A week later, I ran into Travis at a supermarket. He looked older somehow, though only months had passed. Thinner. Humbled. He froze when he saw me near the produce aisle. The same boy who once dismissed me with laughter now stood speechless, guilt crawling up his throat. Hey, I said quietly. He swallowed. Hey. Neither of us moved. The distance between us felt measured, like the width of a chasm that no apology could cross. He tried to meet my eyes but couldn't. Finally he said, Mom told me what happened. But, Brian. I know, I said. He nodded, gaze fixed on the floor. He promised he'd help with school. Said he had it covered. Turns out he hasn't paid anything. I didn't respond. He kept talking, like silence was a mirror he couldn't look into. I didn't realize how much you did. I almost said too late. Instead I asked, how's your mother? Working more, he said. She's tired. I imagine she is. He nodded again like a man confessing a crime to himself. I'm sorry, he whispered. It was a thin apology, fragile as wet paper, but it was real. I could hear the sincerity in the way his voice broke. I know, I said. Take care of her. Then I turned, leaving the moment intact, unspoiled by forgiveness. Some things are better left unspoken, not out of bitterness but mercy. Outside the air smelled of rain. The city shimmered in puddles. I walked to my truck and sat there for a long time before starting the engine. I thought of all the times I'd carried groceries through that same smell, all the times I'd believed effort could earn belonging. The irony wasn't lost on me, that it took leaving for them to see the weight I'd carried. Back in the apartment, I poured a drink and sat at my workbench. On it lay a half-finished chair, ash wood, simple lines, clean joints. I traced the grain with my thumb. It reminded me of the grooves in my palms, all the years that had passed through them. Love without respect, I realized, is like building with wet wood. It looks solid at first, but it warps the moment pressure hits. I had spent a decade building a house out of wet wood. A month passed. Then 2. I saw Mia once by chance outside a theater downtown. She was carrying a costume bag, her hair pinned up, eyes tired but bright. She saw me before I saw her. For a second she froze, then smiled, small, uncertain. Hi Andrew, she said. Hi Mia. You look good. So do you. We stood there in awkward stillness until she said, I didn't get to thank you for the stage. The one you built in the backyard. I nodded. You already did. I know, but it meant more than I said. That was all. She had somewhere to be and I wasn't someone she could linger with. But that tiny moment, that acknowledgement, was enough. Maybe not forgiveness but recognition. By autumn, Sarah called again. Her voice was different now, stripped of its usual defenses. The house feels empty, she said. It was empty before, I replied. I know, she whispered. But now they see it too. I didn't ask what she meant. I could picture it. The walls echoing with absence, the dinners quiet, the rooms colder. She was discovering the cost of her silence. That winter I stopped waiting for calls. I lived small. Coffee at dawn, long days in the workshop, evenings with books and the sound of the radio. I learned to appreciate the simplicity of things that didn't ask for proof of love. The wood, the tools, the rhythm of work, they became prayer. Sometimes I thought about the kids, where they were, what they were becoming. Whether they'd learned anything or just moved their contempt to new targets. But thinking didn't change outcomes and guilt wasn't part of the bargain anymore. One night as I was closing the shop, I found a letter slipped under the door. No name, just my initials scrawled on the front. Inside, a short note written in familiar handwriting. You were right. We didn't know what it cost. Thank you for everything you did even when we didn't see it. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into my wallet. I didn't need to reply. The words were enough, late, imperfect but true. The next morning I drove past the old house one last time. The paint was fading, the porch sagging slightly. It looked smaller than I remembered, like a memory shrinking back to its real size. I parked across the street, watching sunlight touch the windows. No one looked out. I thought about going up, knocking on the door, saying something final. But I'd already said everything worth saying. Instead, I whispered to the steering wheel, "Take care of them," though I didn't know who I was speaking to, Sarah, God, or the wind. Then I drove away. Now I live quietly. My world has shrunk to honest things. Sawdust, coffee, the soft hiss of rain against the window. I eat simply, sleep deeply, and wake without the weight of being unappreciated. Sometimes people ask if I miss them. I tell them I miss the version of myself who believed effort could rewrite blood. The man who thought you could build family the way you build homes, through endurance. But I'm not that man anymore. I'm something smaller, quieter, truer. The lesson came late, but it came clear. Love without respect isn't love. It's servitude dressed in sentiment. I mistook endurance for virtue, silence for strength. But sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is stop giving to those who never learned how to receive. So I end this not with regret, but with a question, the same one that echoes through every empty house I've ever built. Was I wrong to walk away? Or was I finally, after all those years, learning what it means to be free?